Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation.
The time is 6:15. Here is the news edited by Dilini Gunawardena, read by Victor Raj. Here are the headlines of the local news. Iran and Sri Lanka are to expand development cooperation, trade and investment. Plans are on the way to decrease the inflation rate to 5% by the mid-year. The 14th round of ETCA negotiations between India and Sri Lanka will be held in March. Action is taken to promote maritime passenger transport between Sri Lanka and India. The special committee established to address the demands of the health sector trade unions met today. Foreign news. The ICJ hearing on Israel's occupation of Palestine continue for the second day. Sports news, tennis. ATP Rio Open, Britain Cameron Norrie beats Hugo Delane. Local news in detail. Prime Minister Dinesh Gunawardena and visiting Iranian Minister of Foreign Affairs Hossein Amir Abdullahian held discussions on expanding close bilateral ties and development cooperation, trade and investment at the Temple Trees today. The Prime Minister thanked Iran for the assistance provided for the Uma Oya hydroelectricity project, which will add an additional 120 megawatts of power to the electricity grid. The Uma Oya project, in addition to generate of electricity, provides 145 million cubic waters to irrigate 50,000 acres of dry land. Expressing satisfaction over the successful project, Iranian Foreign Minister said Iran is keen to collaborate with Sri Lanka on future projects using the expertise on energy, water, agriculture, nanotechnology, pharmaceuticals and biotechnology. He further expressed pleasure over the conclusion of the barter trade agreement under which Iran supplied crude oil to Sri Lanka for tea. Iran agreed to offset payment of $250 million for crude oil against tea imports from Sri Lanka. So far, $20 million worth tea has been exported to Iran under the barter trade agreement. Several bills and regulations were taken into debate today at the Parliament. State Minister Ranjit Siyambalapete said that the inflation rate will be reduced to 5% by the mid-year. Previously, the inflation rate was 70%, but currently it is 6%. The foreign exchange has increased into $4.7 billion. He further said that the government intends to protect small and medium-scale industries. MP Vijitha Herath said that increasing the salary of certain officers of the central bank cannot be accepted. The Finance Ministry should attend to this matter. MP Professor Ranjit Bandara highlighted the need to introduce a novel system to amendment of the prevailing economic policies. Attention should be paid to the economic policies implemented so far. He further pointed out that the need to move towards modernization while preserving the traditions. The 14th round of negotiations between Sri Lanka and India on the Economic and Technology Cooperation Agreement, ETCA, are scheduled to be held in New Delhi in the first week of March. At its meeting on Monday, the Cabinet considered the submission made by President Ranil Wickremesinghe regarding the current situation of the ECTA and the 13th round of discussions which took place in this regard. Accordingly, the 9 subcommittees responsible for the goods trade, introduction, general provisions and general exceptions service trade, rules of the origin, customs procedure and easing the trade, measurements for sanitation and sanitation of navigation, technical constraints for trade, trade accords and economic and technological cooperation had entered into discussions. Meanwhile, the subcommittee on conflict solving and final provisions is scheduled to conduct their discussions at the end of February 2024 in New Delhi. This news comes to you from the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation. Continuing with more local news, the government approved reducing the deviation tax currently charged on the passengers leaving Sri Lanka by passenger vessels and ships. The discussion was announced at the weekly briefing on cabinet decisions by Minister Dr. Bandula Gunawardena today. Accordingly, the deviation tax currently charged on passengers leaving Sri Lanka by passenger vessels and ships are $5 and $20 respectively. Approval was also granted for a fee baggage allowance of up to 60 kilograms per passenger travelling by passenger vessel. The minister said it has been recognized that the promotion of maritime passenger transport between Sri Lanka and India has the potential to promote the tourism industry by providing increased access to tourists from both countries, improved connections while further encouraging cooperation in the fields of cultural exchange, art and sports. The special committee established by the Minister of Health to address the demands put forth by health sector trade unions met at the ministry today. The committee includes Health Minister Dr. Ramesh Patirana, the Secretary to the Ministry of Health and representatives from the Health Trade Union Alliance. The demands and new proposals of the Health Trade Union Alliance were submitted for the consideration of the committee today. These matters were discussed at length. The response of the ministry in this regard will be submitted to the committee on the 28th Wednesday. That ends local news.
The main news story is brought to you by Sinhala Mahatma.
President Ranil Wickremesinghe, accompanied by FAO Director General Koo Dong-gyu, inaugurated the 37th session of the Regional Conference for Asia and the Pacific of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization at the Hilton Hotel, Colombo today. Several matters of concerns, including the state of food and agriculture in the region, agri-food systems transformation and solutions, particularly for the smallholders and family farmers, are set to be discussed at the high-level ministerial in-person event. That ends main news story.
The main news story was brought to you by Sinhala Mahatma.
Moving on to Watchlight. The Education Ministry emphasizes that the Education Ministry will not issue letters to admit students to grades 1, 5 and 6 for the year 2024. In order to enroll students in the grade 1 of schools, applications should be forwarded to the respective schools according to the circular issued by the Education Ministry. The principals of those respective schools will conduct interviews and enroll the selected students to grade 1. Meanwhile, admission of students to the grade 6 in national schools is made solely on the basis of the scores obtained by students at the grade 5 scholarship examination. In the year 2024, the relevant applications should also be forwarded to the respective schools to admit students to intermediate classes other than grades 1, 5 and 6, including GC advanced levels. If there are vacancies in those schools, the principal will select suitable students after conducting interviews. That came to you on Watchlight.
Coming up, World News.
Headlines first. The ICJ hearing on Israel occupation of Palestine continue for the second day. U.S. proposed UN resolution calling for temporary ceasefire in Gaza. Indian farmers are to resume Delhi march over crop prices. World news in detail. Oral proceedings continue at the International Court of Justice on the legal consequences of Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories. Over 50 states and at least 3 international organizations will address judges at the United Nations top court. A non-binding legal opinion is expected after months of deliberation by the judges. Palestinian representatives presented their arguments on the legal consequences of Israel's occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem and Gaza Strip yesterday. They argued the occupation is illegal and must be brought to an immediate, unconditional and total end. Israel is not attending the hearing but has sent a 5-page written statement saying an advisory opinion would be harmful to attempts to resolve the conflict because questions posed by the UN General Assembly are prejudiced. The United States has drafted a United Nations Security Council resolution calling for temporary ceasefire in the Gaza Strip as soon as practical and opposing an Israeli ground offensive on the southern city of Rafah. The draft said the Security Council should underscore its support for a temporary ceasefire in Gaza as soon as practical based on the formula of all hostages being released, while also lifting all barriers to the provision of humanitarian assistance at scale in Gaza. The U.S. draft also warned Israel not to launch a ground offensive in Rafah. Protesting Indian farmers say they will resume marching to capital Delhi this week after rejecting a government proposal to buy some crops at assured prices on a 5-year contract. The protesters began marching last week but were stopped around 200 kilometers from Delhi. Since then, farmer leaders were in the talks with the government on their demands. The government had proposed buying pulses, maize and cotton at guaranteed floor price, also known as the minimum support price or MSP, through cooperative for 5 years. But the farmers say that they will stand by their demand of a legal guarantee for MSP on all 23 crops, adding the offer was not in their interest. To wrap up the world news, let's take a look at the headlines once again. The ICJ hearings on Israel's occupation of Palestine continue for the second day. U.S. proposed UN resolution calling for temporary ceasefire in Gaza. Indian farmers are to resume Delhi march over crop prices. That ends world news. Moving on to development news. The Sri Lanka Export Development Board, in collaboration with the Sri Lanka Missions in the USA, organized the Sri Lanka Country Pavilion at Sourcing at a Magic Exhibition in Las Vegas, USA, which was held recently with the participation of 11 Sri Lankan companies. The fair showcased men's and children's apparel, footwear, accessories and manufacturing resources from all around the world. The participant firms received positive inquiries which will bring more business to Sri Lanka in the future. The buyers were mainly looking for small orders which are ideal for the Sri Lankan companies. That came to you on Development News.
Moving on with sports news.
Tennis news. British number 1 Cameron Norrie started the defense of his ATP Rio Open title with a routine 6-3, 6-2 win over Bolivian Hugo de Leon in Brazil. Norrie made light work of an opponent who gave him a tough time at the quarter-final stage in 2023. It took Norrie, who offered up just one break point in the match, 1 hour and 21 minutes to seal victory. He will meet Chile's Thomas Barrios Vera for the first time in his career in the next round. That came to you on Sports News.
Go එකක් තියන youth එකට life එකේ change එකට නියමෙට set වෙන්න ඇස් වහගෙන දැකපු හින හැබැයි කරන්න youth එකට නියමෙට set වෙන friendship එක මෙන්න.
The all-new NSB Ithru Mithru account, NSB IM, a plan for your dream.
Business News, sponsored by National Savings Bank, the safest place for your money. The Colombo Stock Exchange signed a memorandum of understanding with the Sri Lanka Institute of Marketing recently to enhance collaborative efforts in advancing educational initiatives and professional development. This effort will ultimately provide students with enhanced access and preparation necessary to recognize and capitalize on opportunities within the financial sector. That came to you on Business News. Moving on to economic news, Interface Tourism, a leading marketing and communications agency in tourism, announced the launch of a groundbreaking wellness campaign to promote Sri Lanka, targeting at the French and German markets. This initiative, commissioned by the European Union delegation with the support of Sri Lanka Tourism Promotion Bureau, is a part of Sri Lanka's strategic effort to position itself as a premier wellness destination in Asia. That came to you on Economic News. Business News, sponsored by National Savings Bank, the safest place for your money.
Go එකක් තියන youth එකට life එකේ change එකට නියමෙට set වෙන්න ඇස් වහගෙන දැකපු හින හැබැයි කරන්න youth එකට නියමෙට set වෙන friendship එක මෙන්න.
The all-new NSB Ithru Mithru account, NSB IM, a plan for your dream.
Moving on to weather report. Showers or thunderstorms may occur at a few places in the Kalutara, Gol, Matara and Ratnapura districts in the evening or night. Mainly fair weather will prevail elsewhere. Fairly strong winds about 30 km per hour can be expected at times in the eastern slopes of the central hills and in the north central, northwestern, over, southern and eastern provinces and in the Mathali and Kandy districts. Misty conditions can be expected at some places and in the western and sub-Ragama provinces during the morning. That ends weather report. To wrap up the evening news on Radio Sri Lanka, let's take a look at the headlines once again. Iran and Sri Lanka are to expand development cooperation, trade and investment. Plans are underway to decrease the inflation rate to 5% by the mid-year. The 14th round of ETCA negotiations between India and Sri Lanka will be held in March. Action is taken to promote maritime passenger transport between Sri Lanka and India. The special committee established to address the demands of the health sector trade unions met today. Foreign news, the ICJ hearings on Israel's occupation of Palestine continue for the second day. Sports news, tennis, ATP Open, Britain-Cameroon, Norris beats Hugo Dalian. With that, we wrap up the evening news on Radio Sri Lanka. Back to my good friend and yours, Chandima Pirakon.